Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation.
This week on To the Contrary, first, a new report shows a staggering number of women looking to downshift or drop out of the workforce. Then, the number of female governors is at an all-time high. But can they hang on? Hello, I'm Bonnie Erbe. Welcome to the Contrary, a weekly discussion of issues affecting diverse communities. Up first, a blessing or a curse? Despite more work from home opportunities than ever, almost half of women report feeling burned out. That's according to a new report from McKinsey & Company and leanin.org. The report also found that 1 in 3 women say they've considered dropping out of the workforce or downshifting their careers. Work from home was supposed to be the great equalizer, but more women than men report experiencing work-driven burnout since the onset of the pandemic. And yet, almost 7 in 10 women said they wanted to keep working remotely even after the pandemic subsides. No commute, cost savings, and work-life balance improvements were mentioned as indispensable perks for remote workers. However, as more women shift to work from home, research finds that remote work could have more pitfalls than previously thought. Joining me today are DC Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, Carrie Lukas, President of the Independent Women's Forum, Sam Bennett, now of the New Amsterdam News, and Republican strategist Rina Shah Bharara. So, Eleanor, why are women feeling so burned out when remote work was supposed to help all of that?
Remote work has helped, but it has also meant that women must take care of their children who had to stay home from school. So for the first time, women were taking care of children and yet trying to work remotely. So that has left women with mixed feelings about working at home.
Okay, but there's something that's not talked about in this report, nor in other reports which say the opposite. There's a report out that says women are thrilled with working from home. How do you possibly get yourself on your boss's, within your boss's purview and, shout out for this is what I'm doing and here I want the next promotion, blah, 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 the kinds of things men do, but usually in person, if you're working from home. Aren't you, Rina, starting out with you, aren't you putting yourself at a huge disadvantage by not being in the office?
I think there's been a pretty robust public debate about what it means to be in an office setting, what it means to be outside of the office setting. To me, there are 5 words that come to mind, and it's flexible work is the future. And I think any employer who is not thinking about that phrase and often is actually not going to be a very good employer in the coming years for the changing American workforce. And that includes women largely, because what we saw last year is the drop-offs that happened, much like the Congresswoman said, those happen because remote work at times meant that you can take on some of the other responsibilities of a household, pay some bills in between meetings, make yourself a sandwich instead of running out for whatever was around your office corner. Things like that were easier and allowed that sort of rest that we get in between work. But what is work even? And I think the future, when we talk about the flexibility, it means that we shouldn't have to worry about the constraints of childcare. And frankly, the lockdowns of last year put such a disadvantage on women because of the fact that it was overwhelmingly women who took on that homeschooling responsibility. So removing that and talking about the future work is so important to include the conversation centered on women because of the very different shares of work that women put on top of already professional responsibilities.
So Sam, and first of all, let me preface all of this by saying that the least well-paid women in our economy and the ones we depend on most, like servers at restaurants, like first responders, like all kinds of people who can't do their work completely remotely, they can't be helped by working from home.
Well, Bonnie, I think that what we're seeing is the COVID pandemic with more women working from home, followed by this report, is pointing to the systemic problems that exist that make it so difficult for women to achieve what we like to think of as work-life balance. Despite the pandemic, despite probably being home with their husbands, women are still doing the lion's share of childcare, housekeeping. And so what's happening now is though two realities are happening. One, yes, working from home makes it more possible for women to balance being with family and getting their work done. But being at home means that it exacerbates some of the underlying cultural and societal issues where women do most of the childcare, women do most of the cooking, women do most of the household work. When we go away to work, we've got a natural barrier to keep us able to be focused on work versus being focused on those chores at home. So I think we have two parallel realities going on at once. And it's very important for us to take a look and take that seriously because we need continued further change to make this work for women.
Carrie, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think this is a really important and interesting conversation, and it's one where there's no easy solution. I do think that the pandemic is really I wish that this hadn't happened. I wish that the big conversation about having more flexibility at work and the potential to work from home didn't surround the pandemic. I've run a women's organization for more than a decade now, and we have been entirely virtual, in part because we wanted people to have the flexibility to be at home and to kind of set their own hours. In a lot of ways, it's been great. We've given a lot of women the opportunity to work who might not have otherwise chosen to do so. And it does, when it comes to as an employer, it means that I'm not focused on FaceTime or hours worked, it's output. How much value are you adding? So I think it actually can be very powerful for women. But I think when we think about that pandemic, the big tragedy was the public schools' refusal to open for so long. I'm a mother of five, and my kids were 5 public school kids between ages of 6 and 16, and they weren't in school for almost a year. It was devastating for them. It was really hard on me and a lot of moms out there, and particularly people who couldn't afford to opt out of schools. All of our area private schools were opened, so those who could get out have left, and it was really hard on those of us who didn't have that option.
I don't hear you, Carrie Lukas, though, addressing the employer's perspective as much as I thought you might. Do you think, I read a report from a gentleman in London who was saying that work-life balance, that telecommuting is leading to people with full-time jobs and getting full-time salaries working part-time. Do you hear this from employers?
And I think moving forward, employers are going to have the option to decide whether this makes sense for them. You point out there's some jobs that can't go offline. I know as an employer myself, about 25 women, that you absolutely can have really good success. And I don't care if somebody works 6 hours versus 8 hours, as long as they're getting their job done. I do think that I thought it was interesting in some of the reports we've seen around this is the challenge of helping people turn off. We've got in my group, we have a lot of women who work really hard, and it's not unusual for us all to be, continuing to work at 10 o'clock at night, and it's time. Sometimes I have to say, hey, it's time for us to go to bed. There's no reason for this, can wait for tomorrow. So I think turning off can be a challenge, but I think a lot of employers are recognizing that this type of flexibility can be a win-win for employer and employee. Not everybody, but a lot of us, and it's going to open up. I think it's entirely good news for women to have these new options, although of course it does come with some challenges.
Congresswoman Norton, how do you work low-income women into this infrastructure bill that the president's trying to get passed, which will include funding for things like federal daycare and that sort of thing?
It does mean huge opportunities for women to integrate themselves into men's jobs. Those jobs could be done outdoors, many of them, even though the pandemic looks like it's going to continue for some time. On the other hand, what we're trying to join the transportation infrastructure bill to is the social policy bill, which probably has more implications for women.
But please, how are you as a feminist, as a strong advocate for women of color, of course, being one, and a lifetime advocate, and how are you trying to make sure that low-income women are not squeezed out of this online revolution of working from home, which didn't exist 15, 20 years ago?
Well, the fact is, Bonnie, that they have been squeezed out in larger part than other women because they were in so-called essential jobs which could not work from home. So lower income women have been most at risk and have indeed paid the largest price for this pandemic because they didn't have the alternative that office workers and other workers could have by working at home. They simply had to be on the job every day.
Sam, I heard you in the background there, kind of aching to respond, I think. And you're a lifelong advocate for women of all colors. And do you agree with the Congresswoman that women are being completely left out of the infrastructure bill? And if so, what should be done?
I couldn't agree more with the Congresswoman because, and I think she nailed it, the women that are most at risk, that are the most marginalized in our society. In fact, the citizens of the United States that are the most marginalized are women of color, period. And often they are through this whole pandemic, they have been overwhelmingly overrepresented in caregiving for those that are sick, overwhelmingly represented in grocery stores, for example, and those type of work, and they have not been able to stop. They've had to work continuously through this, and typically for very low pay. Far less than their counterparts who might be white or in other professions might receive. I think that this bill, we have this historic opportunity, this infrastructure bill. Please correct me, Congresswoman Norton, if I mischaracterize this, but this is the most dramatic bill that we've seen since the New Deal, and it's long overdue. So yes, what we need to do is also look for social equity within that bill. I don't honestly.
But what besides, let me ask you this, what besides free daycare for their children can be done for women who have to work in the office or in the wherever it is that they're doing their work, that they can't work remotely? It won't work for them.
Well, I think what we need to look at.
If you're a fruit picker in California, forget about remote work. It's not even part of your life.
Exactly. And something that is very under talked about by way of comparison, if I'm in Britain, if I'm a business owner and I'm in Britain, if I'm in Sweden, if I'm in Norway, if I'm in Germany, if I'm in France, I don't have to hold the cost of healthcare for my employers, because for my employees, guess what? The government does it. So what I think we need to have is some financial offset. So if you are an employer and you have women that have to be, and all workers, obviously, but weighted more heavily towards women, particularly women of color that have to come in, there needs to be a financial offset that is experienced by the employee, that the employer is given assistance with by the federal government. I think that's the quickest solution to this, because again, business in America bears a cost that no other rich nation in the world bears. No other business in the rich world bears, which is the cost of providing healthcare for those employees that they choose to do it for.
It sounds great to say, oh, we're going to get all this free childcare, and nobody cares about another trillion in spending, so it's not even worth talking about the price tag. But something I find very bizarre in this whole conversation is we've just seen the utter failure during COVID of our government-run K through 12 schools. And I find it mysterious as why we would be saying, now is the time, let's do that for our 0 to 5-year-olds. You had much more success in private 0 to 5-year-old care, preschools and childcare is opening up to serve those essential workers and all those people, where your public schools, which we now see learning gaps, especially for children, low-income children, Black children who have lost a year of learning because of public schools, where all of my area private schools opened, had in service, those kids learned, the public schools didn't. And why didn't they? Because they didn't have to. They weren't going to lose customers. They knew they didn't have to serve our kids. Parents have absolutely no leverage. It's the same reason why I see in my public school parents.
So what are you saying you want?
I'm saying you should not have, you should, if we need to, if we're trying to find, if we want to solve the childcare problem, that's give money to parents, help, especially low income parents. There's no reason why people should just get, that rich people should be getting money so that they're, to put their kids in public schools. We should not double down on the failed K through 12 system. We need to impact, this is literally, you've seen, like, why would you have a K through 12? The K through 12 schools did not open during COVID. So they are not, why would we think they would open in the next pandemic? Why would they be there for people in the future? I think it's incredibly baffling why we would do that when we know that they're so much more expensive, something like Head Start, which is so much more expensive than private preschool and fails to provide service. I just don't know why we double down on the government model. We should provide, I am all for providing targeted aid to help people who need childcare, but we shouldn't do it down, just have it expand government to do a terrible job.
All right, and let me just say, because there are plenty of people, yes, there are certainly problems with the public school system, but also a lot of people believe it's among the best in the world. So as plagued as it is, it still beats.
The stats sure don't show it. I would like to see those test scores.
It's certainly better than being in public school in Central America. Let's put it that way. From working to governing, women have advanced in the House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, state legislatures, and even in the White House, with a first female vice president. And while there's a record number of female governors, only 9 women hold the top spot in state government, and that was first achieved in 2004. 6 of the current 9 governors are Democrats and 3 are Republicans. 4 rose to their positions by succession, not by election. The most recent is Kathy Hochul, who became New York's first female governor after Andrew Cuomo resigned over claims of sexual harassment. 36 states will hold gubernatorial elections in 2022. Both parties are concerned the number of women governors could slide. Starting with you, Sam Bennett, why are we poised to lose some female governors next year? And why is this one of the remaining, glass ceilings that women can't bash their way through?
Well, women do far better, Bonnie, in what's termed legislative office, in terms of electability. The voting public sees women as able to sort of man the fort when it comes to legislative election. But when it comes to executive office, that is sort of the glass ceiling we're bumping up against here. It's very difficult. Now, obviously, we have the joy of seeing Kamala Harris in New York, where I currently work. I personally worked with Kathy Hochul when I was CEO of Women's Campaign Fund. Thrilled to see her ascend to this role. But there are many, many challenges because we have not yet gotten to the point where voters actually see women able to do that executive work. And having run for office numerous times myself for executive office for mayor of my hometown, Allentown, Pennsylvania, I know exactly where that comes from in the polling that we've done. The other issue is, and this is the systemic issue at hand, is we still need far more women running. That's our biggest problem, because if it's that much harder for women to get elected, we need that much more women running in order to get up the pipeline. And again, the problem is women still see politics as distasteful. They do not like the mud wrestling aspect of it and the mudslinging, and they opt to be change makers in the nonprofit world versus the political world. So the systemic reason is we do not have enough women that run for office even today, and voters still have a hard time seeing women as being executive capable.
And Rina, why are there so many fewer Republican women governors, half the number, than Democratic women. And of course, that statistic repeats itself if you look at the House of Representatives and the US Senate. There are always fewer Republican women. But why is that? And what's going to happen to the Republicans who are up for re-election?
Voters are typically very punitive to women in a state executive's role. If they feel that that woman particularly hasn't led a charge well, or, you know, there's been a couple missteps here and there, I believe that voters are more punitive to women, and therefore it makes it tougher for re-election. But this is again about systemic issues that we have seen over time. I am somebody that doesn't want quotas, for example, in our state legislatures. I'm somebody that's actually more inclined to support reforms such as ranked choice voting, which I believe is very palatable to many people on both sides of the aisle. In Utah, it's extremely beloved. I believe there are over 20 counties that have adopted it because they love it so much. It's cost efficient and it takes the toxicity out of campaigning. It takes that away, that veneer of negative campaigning that always comes with, again, having to attack somebody who is foreseen to be the front runner. But with these reforms, I think comes a very sincere need to have a robust conversation about how women get to certain positions. What I very much love is a woman that makes her way from private life right into a top executive role because she sees it as an entrepreneurial feat, comes into public service as an entrepreneur, somebody who wants to solve problems. And we've seen that with many Republican women over time. My coming up in Republican politics, for example, over the years when I was a young professional, I saw Nikki Haley be a great state executive. I saw Susanna Martinez, Christine Todd Whitman. These were names that I was intimately familiar with, and their leadership style was beloved. I think you can be a really strong fiscal conservative and stand independent and be independently minded and go to really any position that leads up to that of a state governor, for example, and be effective as an entrepreneur. So I really hope that we will start to do less of this. We need to ask a woman to run and figure out what are the structural barriers that are actually palatable for everyone in order to remove them and get more women running, because Sam is so right. We just need more women running.
Bonnie, the problem is that the governor is a person in charge in a leadership position. We're just getting our first woman vice president, hopefully a president. We don't see women in charge in business. We don't see women in charge of anything. So why should we think that they should be in charge of an entire state? This is endemic in our system, where women have yet to rise to where they are seen and understood to be leaders, and should in fact be elected to leadership positions in every sense of the word, just as we have elected, although only because she was on the ticket with a presidential candidate, but we finally elected a vice president who could be the first female president.
Now, Congresswoman, are you familiar with the situation of each of these 9 female governors? I think some of them are term limited out. What are the Democrats doing to make sure that the number doesn't drop from 9? You know, that we don't go backwards to a level that we actually first met in 2004.
4 by succession, including the present governor of the state of New York. So women have an obligation for those who have succeeded to the post to make sure they remain in the post. And that is going to be our challenge in the next election.
Yeah, women, Democrats have a huge challenge in the next election, and they have history working against them completely. You know, the party that comes in and takes over the presidency loses seats in the next election in the House.
Except that these women are already in office, unlike the rest of us. And this may help them to stay in office because they're going to have a record and they're going to be making history.
All right. And your thoughts on this, please, Carrie.
You know, I think that first it's important when we're talking about, sometimes I think we're talking about women voters or women being elected. When we talk about voters, Let's remember that women cast more than half of the votes. So if it's people who have antiquated assumptions about what women are capable of, it's women themselves who are holding other women back. Most what I see, I mean, I look at the political world today and think, why would anybody in their right mind want to get involved in most of this? I think a lot of women look at this and think it's terrible. I think especially as a Republican woman, most the support systems that you're not going to get in Nobody on the Today Show and all of these kind of, in Glamour magazine, all of these places that sing such high praises and glorify the left and celebrate them are going to be the first to trash you and tear you down. I think that's a real barrier for conservative women who don't want to stick their head out, because there's certainly no feminist group is going to, so-called feminist group is going to get their back. The progressive machine is going to try to tear them down. So, I don't lament this. And I also think I don't care. I don't fixate on the idea. I want women to be out there, but we need good people to run. I don't care if you're a male or a female or something in between, whatever. I want good people to be out there running. And I'm not focused on just having, girl power, because for the sake of having girls up there, it's all about getting good women and or good people in office to do the best for our country and our states.
And thank you for that, Carrie Lukas. That's it for this edition. Let's keep the conversation going on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and visit our website at pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, please join us next week.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more. PBS.